Welcome to the Something to Gnaw On podcast, a parable-style devotional designed to mentally or spiritually give you something to gnaw on throughout your day. I'm your host, Nate Vinio. This episode is a continuation of King Ahaz and the rescue message, and you might call it the hardest part of the message from Isaiah. And just a heads up, we'll be looking at a passage in Joshua before getting to Isaiah today. And before we get to Joshua, we'll be looking at a story from the great state of Alaska, but we'll get back to Ahaz near the end. Let's dive in. They sat on the ridge, just glassing the valley. They had moose to hunt and tags to fill, but sometimes watching rare events in nature is more important than pulling the trigger. This story is recorded in a book called Wild Men, Wild Alaska, in which the author is an outfitter, and over the years he's managed to log several crazy tales, from celebrity clients to presidents like George H.W. Bush and his Secret Service entourage, which I can't fathom what it'd be like to have to guide that group into the wild, but he did. There are the crazy animal encounters, there are the miraculous moments, and then there's this scene. Not something you would likely see on a normal pack trip into the wild. And I don't have the book anymore, but this story has been embedded on my mind since I picked this book up nearly 20 years ago. In the process of scoping the land for a moose to shoot, the outfitter spotted a grizzly feasting on a moose that had been freshly killed. This is not an abnormal sight, and if you're concerned this far into the interior of Alaska, they are grizzlies and not brown bears. The author jokes about bears changing back and forth between grizzlies and brown bears when they cross this random line on a map. The issue is that whether you call them a brown bear or a grizzly, they are genetically the same. It's just that the ones that are called grizzlies are a little more inland and have a significantly different diet, which results in a significantly different coloration and sometimes size. The grizzlies don't get to gorge themselves on salmon each summer, and their coats show it, so they look slightly different. Ultimately, the line is irrelevant, and it is irrelevant to our study here, but in the day and age of identifying and self-identifying, I figured I ought to make it clear for somebody out there. So, anyhow, as this outfitter and his hunters were watching this grizz gorge himself on the moose, 3 wolves show up. They didn't come in running and rush the grizz in numbers. They walked in, methodically, evenly spaced, and they began to walk around the grizz. Now I want to ask you quickly to think about this. Who's going to win this fight? The grizz has all the strength and power, and he's still about twice the weight of the 3 wolves combined. By the way, have you ever seen a bear fight? And if you haven't, I'd almost suggest that you take a break and watch a fight on YouTube or something of that nature, because they're absolutely menacing. They're powerful, and amazingly enough, for their size, they're incredibly quick. The wolves continued their walk around the bear, teeth visible. They saunter with their heads down low, in a way that causes their shoulder blades to pop off their back. And slowly and methodically, step by step, the 3 walk in a circle around the bear. The bear eyes the most risky wolf and turns to follow him, then spins to follow the gray one, then spins again to follow the black one. He doesn't want them to get behind him, and that's the weakness of the grizzly. They usually travel alone and have no one to watch their back. This went on for quite a while, the wolves simply walking slowly and quietly around the grizz, and the grizz spinning in circles, trying to guard his kill. Eventually, the confrontation came to an end in a very anticlimactic fashion. I expected the grizz to put the beat down on the wolves, and, if not dead, for them to limp away in pain and regret. But it didn't end that way. Overcome by the taunting eyes combined with the perpetual and silent warpath walk from the wolves, the bear apparently lets fear arise within, and without a roar, without a fight, without a drop of blood, he abandons his domain He abandons his kill and runs away. The 3 dogs that kept their mouths shut, walking in slow, taunting circles, managed to chase off North America's most menacing animal. And whether it would be preferred to be identified as a grizzly or a brown bear, well, I can't say. If ever there were a story of walking in circles, it would be the Israelites. For 40 years they walked in circles in the desert, and when it comes to their first battle at Jericho, well, what better way to instill fear in your enemy than to walk around them in circles, right? But that is part of what would happen. Surely you remember the story from the book of Joshua, chapter 6. Walk around Jericho once per day for 6 days, then on the 7th day, walk around 7 times. It starts off like a bad prescription medication instruction. Then they were to blow the ram's horn on the 7th time around, lift up their voices to the Lord, and the walls would come tumbling down. The end. The end of the instructions, at least. But have you ever read verse 10? He adds this command to his instruction that most people overlook. And I would ask the question, why? As we get into our time to talk about Ahaz and Isaiah and the rescue message, why would Joshua say this? Why would Isaiah say this? Why would anyone say anything like this in a conflict situation? Here is verse 10. Quote, "Do not shout, do not even talk," Joshua commanded. "Not a single word from your mouth until I tell you to shout. Then shout." That's in the NLT. Peterson puts part of it this way in the Message, quote, "Don't even speak, not so much as a whisper, until you hear me say, shout." So why does Joshua have to say this? God parted the Red Sea, did many miracles in the desert. Days prior, they all saw God part the Jordan River and stop it up completely. Why do they now have to be silent? Well, just put yourselves in the shoes of the average Jew who's told to walk in circles for 6 days around Jericho. At some point, Moshe is going to get tired and begin questioning out loud the wisdom of this battle strategy. Shortly after that, all those around Moshe will begin to question the strategy, even people who weren't even thinking about it in the first place. Then Shemp comes up with a better plan and plays the "we shoulda" card like a CNN analyst to everyone who will listen to him. And people who up to this point in time were walking in silent obedience, who were okay with this strategy, are now questioning the whole game plan. And the doubt and subversion spreads like wildfire through the whole camp. Then the families of Magbish and Michmash begin to compare their fears and all the ways that things could go wrong. What if they throw rocks on us tomorrow? What if? What if? What if? And each day it gets worse as they imagine new ways this plan could go wrong. What they don't get is that fear spreads like wildfire when it's verbalized. So does dissension and numerous other sinful thoughts. In the New Testament, with the blessing of hindsight, of course, James comments on situations like this in chapter 3, quote, "And the tongue is, in a sense, a fire, the very world of injustice and unrighteousness. The tongue is set among our members as that which contaminates the entire body, and sets on fire the course of our life, the cycle of man's existence, and is itself set on fire by hell." This right here is the reason why a guy like Joshua commanded the Israelites to keep their mouths shut. This right here is why a guy like Ahaz should keep his mouth shut too. And this is the lesson we should learn as well. It doesn't seem like that should be that hard, but never underestimate the destructive power of a fool, especially a wicked fool when they speak, or even that of an innocent individual in their ignorance. And the game plan to walk around Jericho is ripe for that. Even though they're coming out of an incredibly great miracle by crossing the Jordan River, Joshua steps up and puts a spiritual gag order in place. Again, I ask, why? Because what God is doing is awesome, and the timing is incredible. And there are times that an idle word can destroy the things God is wanting to do. Sometimes true words can destroy the thing God is wanting to do. And this one is tough to swallow, I'll say it, but just because it's true doesn't mean you have to say it. You don't have to vocalize every thought that crosses your mind. It's not necessary, and dare I say, it's probably detrimental in a lot of cases. And that's the end of my marriage counseling throughout the day, but, well, just all joking aside, sometimes you simply need to, wait for it, and if you're a bit old school here, brace for it, but sometimes you simply need to shut up, to be quiet, to give your vocal cords a rest, to close your mouth. Fermez vos bouches, which is French, of course, for shut your mouth. And I know this because I took 1 year of French in high school, and the teacher used to say that to me all the time. Fear and envy and a critical spirit and all kinds of evil that are bound up in the thoughts of our minds are contagious, and they spread like fire through our words. And that's why Joshua issues the gag order. In a moment, we'll take a quick look at what Solomon has to say about the topic, and keep in mind where we're heading in this lead-in. We're going to get back to talking about King Ahaz, one of the worst kings of Judah, an impulsive man, a people-pleaser, a pot-smoking, child-sacrificing rebel. But God in His mercy reaches out to him and gives him a plan of attack to deal with the threat from the north. And today's study focuses on the second statement he makes in Isaiah 7:4, which is, be quiet. The whole statement made to Ahaz in Isaiah 7:4 is, be careful, be quiet, don't fear, and don't lose heart. In the last 2 episodes, we looked at how being careful in and of itself reduces fear and the likelihood of losing heart by simply eliminating the situations that arise that cause the fear in the first place. And the be quiet command, well, it does the same. But before we go any further, let's look at what Solomon had to say. And as I read these, think about how they relate to causing or eliminating fear and faint-heartedness. This is just a random sample through the book of Proverbs, by the way. Chapter 8, verses 6 and 7. A fool's lips walk into a fight, and his mouth invites a beating. A fool's mouth is his ruin. His lips are a snare to his soul. Chapter 15, verse 28. The heart of the righteous ponders how to answer, but the mouth of the wicked pours out evil things. Chapter 15, verses 1 and 2. A gentle answer deflects anger, but a harsh word makes tempers flare. The tongue of the wise makes knowledge appealing, but the mouth of the fool belches foolishness. Chapter 14, verse 3. A fool's proud talk becomes the rod that beats him, but the words of the wise keep them safe. And lastly, chapter 17, verses 27 and 28. Whoever restrains his words has knowledge, and he who has a cool spirit is a man of understanding. Even a fool, like Ahaz, who keeps silent is considered wise, and when he closes his lips, he is deemed intelligent. Keep in mind that Ahaz had access to these writings. Ahaz didn't have access to the James reference mentioned earlier, but he did have access to his great-grandfather's book of wisdom. He should have known better. There's an interesting bit of backstory of Ahaz and Isaiah that I want to revisit. Have you ever heard someone playing the "you don't understand me" card? This is that person that says, yeah, that gospel message about grace and forgiveness is great and all, but you don't understand what I've gone through. Or, hey, pastor, you can preach it from the pulpit pretty easy. You've had a pretty easy life, but you don't understand me and where I'm come from. Now, keep in mind that the fact that one person's understanding of another person's background does not change the value, impact, or importance of the gospel message. So let's call a statement like that what it is. It's a smokescreen, a diversion tactic. But nonetheless, people use it because they can focus the fight between themselves and another human, a preacher maybe. And at the same time, what they do is they delay the more important fight between themselves and the Holy Spirit. Now, that being said, I think it's a thing of beauty that, while it may not be identical, Isaiah's transformation in Isaiah 6 came on the confession of having unclean lips and living among a people of unclean lips. He had a problem with his mouth. It's a thing of beauty, really. Ahaz can't tell Isaiah, "You don't understand." He can't play that card. God doesn't send a perfect man to Ahaz to instruct him. He sends a recovering potty mouth, who's now the Lord's mouthpiece. A man who hasn't shared all of Ahaz's many faults, but certainly one who's been victorious over the most important one, the taming of the tongue. I love our First Amendment right to free speech. But let's keep in mind that having the right to speak freely doesn't mean it's wise or profitable to do so, and it's not a mandate that we speak everything. In fact, we have the Fifth Amendment right to keep silent. We live in a culture right now that maniacally churns this pot to get people talking as a way to provoke drama and pain and hurt and attention and distraction. And all of this for a myriad of negative reasons like driving ratings and clicks and for some to simply get the attention that they desire. The challenge for the Christian is to know when to speak and when to keep quiet. And I think if we're tuned into things, especially when things are bad, there's value in being silent, spending time in prayer, and letting God work. As we wrap up this charge from Isaiah to Ahaz, take hold of the wisdom and be careful to be quiet. It truly is the rescue message. It's tough, but it'll get the job done. Remember from Proverbs and James, the greatest way to mitigate fear and anxiety is to control what we say and what we do. It's no great exploit for a wolf to take down a sheep. It's no great exploit for a wolf to make noise and howl at the moon and strike fear in those around them. But never forget how powerful disciplined silence can be. A bear isn't afraid of the wolf or his howl, but a quiet and intentional walk can accomplish great things. Just ask Joshua. The Israelites silently walk a single lap for 6 days, and on the seventh day, they walk another 6 laps silently. But the time finally comes when it's time to raise a hallelujah in the presence of their enemies. In their confrontation with Jericho, they spend 91% of their time being quiet, holding their tongue, keeping their opinions to themselves. 9% of the time, they opened their mouth, and what came out was a shout of praise and worship. And what happened? The miraculous happened. Walls came down in miraculous fashion, and the entire city was destroyed without physical might, mental acuity, or a diplomatic silver-tongued word. It's a testament to the power of being quiet, and only speaking when instructed to. It's a testimony that King Ahaz is unable to boast of. I wish I had time to give you 5 easy steps to keep your mouth shut. But let's be honest. If you have to ask the question, you might want to err on the safe side and keep things to yourself, especially in heated moments. Certainly there's a time to speak, but let's be honest. Saying what's on our mind is not something we struggle with. It's the taming of the tongue, as James puts it. And even then, when we speak, it should be done with great restriction and wisdom that we can easily glean from the book of Proverbs. So my challenge this week, and really throughout the summer, is to get into Proverbs. Read 1 per day and gnaw on it. That's where you will find your 5 easy steps, or your quick reference guide, or your pro tips on how to be careful in a myriad of situations and when to keep your mouth shut. And when it comes time to speak, pray that the Holy Spirit and the wisdom of Proverbs will guide you. And for those of you who would enjoy an advanced challenge, as you go through this episode, consider how this applies to the things that we post on social media and the emails that we send. I think you'll find that they are pretty much one and the same. But anyhow, until next week,